My name is Cassandra. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm coordinator for the Community Safety and Justice team at PolicyLink. I'm currently based on Amamutsu and Ohlone land, now known as Gilroy, California. I'll describe myself for folks who can't see me. I'm a young, light-skinned Arab woman with long dark hair, dark eyes, a septum ring, wearing a black shirt. Our goal for this webinar is to be accessible to all. This presentation will be bilingual in both English and Spanish, and closed captioning will be available. If you'd like to hear this call interpreted, you'll need Zoom version 5.0 or later to access interpretation. If you need to update Zoom now, feel free to leave the call and rejoin after. Buenas tardes y bienvenidas a Centrando Visiones de la Comunidad para Reinventar la Seguridad Pública, lecciones aprendidas de Austin y Oakland. Mi nombre es Cassandra, mis pronombres son ella y soy coordinadora en el equipo de justicia y seguridad comunitaria en la organización PolicyLink. Estoy llamando desde territorio Amamotzenolone, conocido como Gilroy, California. Ahora me voy a describir a mí mismo para ellas que no me pueden ver. Soy una mujer árabe joven con piel clara, pelo largo y oscuro y ojos oscuros, con un anillo de nariz y estoy vestido con una camisa negra. Nuestro objetivo hoy es que esta presentación será accesible para todos. La presentación de hoy es bilingüe, como pueden ver, en español y en inglés, y también habrá subtítulos disponibles. Entonces, para poder oír la interpretación, van a necesitar versión 5.0 o más reciente de la aplicación de Zoom. Si necesita volver a descargar la aplicación, pueden irse de la llamada y luego volver. To access closed captioning, please click the small icon that says C. Sorry, I'm hearing lots of interpretation. To access closed captioning, please click the small icon that says CC at the bottom of your screen. You might also see ... more, and that will give you the option for closed captioning. Para usar subtítulos, haz clic al icono que dice CC en la parte de abajo de su aplicación y selecciona Closed Captioning. O en la parte de abajo, haz clic en el icono .more y ahí podría escoger subtítulos o Closed Captioning. To access interpretation, can I get the next slide, please? And the next one. To access interpretation, you'll see a globe at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation is available. Click the globe and choose your preferred language. The language you have chosen will be displayed at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. If you're joining from a phone or tablet, you can choose the ... more option at the bottom of your screen and select interpretation and select your preferred language, then click done. Please make sure you choose either English or Spanish or you won't be able to hear the presenters. Van a ver un globito en la parte de abajo de su aplicación de Zoom que dice que la interpretación está disponible. Haz clic en el globo y por favor escoja su idioma preferido. El idioma que escogiste será visible en el parte de abajo de su pantalla. Next slide, please. Si están conectados por un teléfono o una tableta, pueden darle el more en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y ahí seleccionar interpretación y escoger su lenguaje. Después presiona listo. Por favor, escoja español o inglés porque si no, no van a poder oír. Entonces, la interpretación comenzará ahora. Interpretation will start now and I will pass to Anand.
Thank you, Cassandra. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Anand Subramanian. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm speaking today from Ohlone land, now called Oakland, California. For those who can't see me, I'm a dark-skinned, bald South Asian man with glasses. I'm a managing director at PolicyLink, and you can find out more about our work to advance community safety and justice on our website at policylink.org. Before I turn to my colleague, Sarah Makuria, who will act as our moderator today, I wanted to thank you for joining us and share a quick overview of today's event. We are a year and 2 days removed from the brutal police murder of George Floyd that sparked a global uprising and amplified a call to adequately resource Black communities instead of continuing to pour billions of dollars into a wasteful, expensive system of policing that does not keep Black folks safe and in fact exacerbates violence and harm. This call to divest from policing and invest in community had been a local demand for many years, led by Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other POC organizers in cities like Oakland, Austin, Durham, Milwaukee, Los Angeles, and many other cities. To acknowledge this call and meet these demands, Oakland and Austin and a few other cities and counties quickly established Reimagining public safety task forces that were tasked with developing actionable recommendations to increase safety by shifting funding away from police toward investments in addressing the root causes of violence and harm and in developing alternatives to policing. PolicyLink co-facilitated the Oakland Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, largely because we knew that it was the direct result of years of local organizing from trusted community partners who held expertise in what it meant to reimagine public safety. This was critical, especially in the face of misunderstanding and co-optation toward tried and failed traditional police reform efforts. Today's webinar centers the voice and perspectives of some of these amazing local leaders, including youth organizers in Oakland who played the critical role of engaging young people's perspectives through an impressive youth advisory board to the Oakland Task Force. You'll also hear from longstanding movement leaders and organizers in Austin who drove an inclusive, community-centered process grounded in shared values. After presentations from representatives from Oakland and Austin, we will have time for questions from the audience. And later this summer, we will also release a facilitator's guide to reimagining public safety task forces and host a closed session for organizers interested in diving deep into task force strategies. You can indicate interest in this event through our post-webinar survey that you'll receive in an email. And please do fill out that survey regardless. Thank you again for joining. With that, I will turn to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Anand. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Sarah Mokuria. I am a senior associate on the Community Safety and Justice team here at PolicyLink. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from the occupied territory of the Wichita, Comanche, Caddo, and Cherokee people, also known as Dallas, Texas. For those of us who can't see me, I am a light-skinned Black woman with dark black curly hair, and I'm wearing a red blouse. This week has been tremendously heavy because we are marking the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. But the real tragedy is that every day in this country is an anniversary of 1 to 3 people who have been killed by police. Over $100 billion are spent on law enforcement every single year in this country. Resistance to policing has existed for as long as policing has existed. The folks who are joining us tonight have done tremendous work in creating a new reality for public safety in our cities. Tonight, we are joined by folks James, Sikander, Christina, thank you so much for joining. I want to start tonight with James. James, will you please briefly introduce yourself and tell us about your work on the task force and how this process is part of a larger vision you have for public safety in Oakland?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. Can you hear me?
I can, and we can see you.
Awesome. Great. My name is James Birch. I'm the policy director for the Anti-Police Terror Project. I am a Black man with a beard and mustache, and I'm wearing a blue hoodie, and my Zoom background is a running waterfall. I've been running the Defund OPD campaign. Or sorry, can we move to the next slide, please? And the next slide again. Thank you so much. My name is James Birch, and I've been running the Defund OPD campaign since 2016 as part of the Anti-Police Terror Project. APTP is an organization that fights to end police violence in communities of color. To learn more, you can visit us at antipoliceterrorproject.org. Next slide, please. The launch of the OPD, the Defund OPD campaign, was inspired by the rape and sex trafficking scandal that implicated officers from districts throughout the East Bay. It's grounded on the theory that police are not only unaccountable when it comes to use of force, they're unaccountable when it comes to their use of our tax dollars. Next slide, please. This is these two slides you see here were from a protest we launched in front of the Oakland Police Department to increase visibility on the issue. Next slide, please. And this picture is from a protest we had at the promotion ceremony for several of the officers who were involved in the cover-up of the rape and sex trafficking scandal within the Oakland Police Department. Great. And so in 2016, at that time, we realized that we really needed to educate the public as to who the police were and what it was costing for all of their services, right? All these things that have been hidden behind the veil of secrecy. So since 2016, we've been fighting to educate the public on the issues you see on this slide and research and learn more about them, and also provide a blueprint for other cities who are attempting to engage in similar public education campaigns. Next slide, please. And we've done that in collaboration with the Refund Oakland Community Labor Coalition, right? This is a coalition of community-based organizations and labor unions who over the past several decades have seen their hopes for the city divested from in the interest of investing in law enforcement, and from the union perspective, watched services decline and labor negotiations, always be second to the negotiations of the Oakland Police Officer Association. And so the theory is that we could be the experts on policing and police budgets, right? Not only because that's a lot of information to be focused on, but also because it's hard. It's hard for sorry, excuse me, I've got a baby running around in the background. It's hard for folks who are not for labor and community-based organizations to go against the cops, right? It costs a lot of political capital, and those who are engaged in these struggles will know that. And so, someone needs to be the hammer and be able to take the brunt of the criticism that you're going to get if you claim law enforcement as ineffective, even if they are. Next slide, please. And so this is what things have looked, this is what things look like from 2016, and over the following years, as more attention and public education has been invested in the city of Oakland, and then through the George Floyd uprising, what was APTP's Defund OPD campaign has really ballooned into the Defund the Police Coalition, which includes 13 BIPOC-led organizations throughout Oakland who are listed here. And again, these aren't new relationships. We've organized in a number of capacities with all these organizations, for years. It's just, at this point, folks have coalesced around the mission to defund the police. Next slide, please. Right. So those organizations came together organically as part of what we called the F Your Curfew protest, when the city of Oakland attempted to put in, during the pandemic, attempt to install a curfew in the city of Oakland. We think that curfews are dangerous for the people, and so we fought very hard as a unit to get that curfew removed, and from that came this coalition, and we've been working together ever since. Next slide, please. And as a result of the intense pressure, sorry, press one more time. Thank you. Sorry about that. And so as a result of the pressure that we put on the city, they legislated last spring the creation of this task force as a result of our demands. We know that you can't defund the police by 50% overnight. What we do know is that we needed a pathway to do so. And so we demanded the creation of this task force. And here we are now. Next slide, please. Here is the structure of the task force. I know I'm a little short on time, so I'm not going to really belabor this right now, but happy to discuss it at length if there are questions. Next slide, please. Great. And so, okay, so what did we learn from this task force, and what are, like, the real takeaways? One, it takes a community to run these task force. If you don't have a lot of political pressure that you can place as a collective, it's difficult to run this, and bureaucracy will almost run you over. Two, people don't know anything. People don't know a lot about policing, right? And police benefit from that secrecy, because their contracts are based around the theory that they want to maximize their compensation, not on public safety, right across the board. And so illuminating that for council members and for the people is critical. Three, a broad-based coalition is needed to run these task force. There are a lot of people whose interests are at stake, and they, as stakeholders, they need to be invited to this table. Four, we wrote a shadow report on the recommendations that came before the task force. The task force spent a period of 6 or so months deliberating and developing recommendations. And before those recommendations went to city council, we wrote a report on them, trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. And I think we did a really good job of that, and we're able to really make clear what is reimagining public safety and what is filler that the administration was trying to push through. And then 5, we fought back against attacks with data and expertise. You have to be clear on what police do and not do, what they're good at and what they're bad at, and just have a really explicit and honest conversation about policing if you're going to engage in this, and that needs to be informed by data. A lot of folks really misunderstand who police are and what they do. Next slide, please. Wait, sorry, could you go back a slide? I meant to go through the not so good. Okay, one, the appointments were critical, and we should have put more pressure on to make sure that the folks who were put on the task force were serious about the mission. The legislation says to defund the police by 50% and reinvest in services. And there were several members of the task force who were not down with that mission, so they shouldn't have been on the task force. And so we needed to be clearer in the beginning about what was asked for, and made sure that folks who were not down with the mission weren't included in the process, right? The city had already legislated what we were doing. The task force was to execute that vision. Two, the administration dragged its feet. We have a mayor who's not in favor of reimagining public safety. She likes good old status quo public safety. And so there were a lot of data requests that we really didn't get. We had to bring in some outside analysts. It was just a messy situation. Three, with rising violence in the city of Oakland, we needed more public education about the relationship between policing and homicide rates. Folks, when they get fear of violence, the natural inclination is to have more cops, right? The data suggests that there are more effective methods of investing in public safety at that time, so we needed to be clear about that. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick look at some of the things who came through. I'll link in the chat a list of the recommendations that ultimately went through the task force. Again, there was a lot we learned in this process, and a lot we could have done better, but I think we really came out with a victory because we brought the whole community to the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, James. I'm now going to invite Christina from Courage to give us a presentation of her work.
What's up, everybody? This is Christina. For those who cannot see me, I have long black hair, little wavy, have hoops on, earrings on, and our Closed Youth Prisons Build Youth Leaders sweatshirt on. I work with Communities United for Restorative Justice, also pronounced as Courage. I am the Homies for Justice Program Associate, where I help co-lead the program. And I was also a part of the Youth Advisory Board, a Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. For those who don't know, Oakland is a city most impacted by policing, and it heavily targets our Black and brown young folks. We will see some, testimonies in a minute. Super excited for you guys to be seeing those. And really, we just want to talk about, the traumas of policing in our communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we did hold a plática with about 65 young people from the town, all over the spots, District 5, District 7, and they talked about and really reopened those wounds of what police terror looks like and how it has affected them on their daily lives. If you can see on the presentation, we have some quotes from our young folks, and really we had this space, like I mentioned, to reopen those wounds and really talk about how police terror has heavily affected our young Black and Brown folks. Next slide, please. Here you can see on the presentation, we asked them specifically, how did police make them feel? 0% said that they made police make them feel safe. And that has a lot to say. It has a lot to say about our communities and how our young folks from the town, walk around in their hoods, always having to be on point and really 10 toes is how we say it out here. You can also see on the screen, one of our Homies for Justice participants had said, she was once excited to see policemen, but as she, got older and really got to see the realities of how police terrorize her community, that changed her perspective and really changed like the views of what police look like. Next slide, please. Here we talk about reimagining public safety and really going in depth of like what it looks like and how, where in specific places where we do not need police. Many folks mentioned, domestic violence, noise complaints, and really making sure that they know where they're needed and where they're not needed. Next slide, please. Thank you. Many folks talked about where we wanted to redirect those funds, and mental health and domestic violence were the highest ones on those in those conversations. So our young folks already know where they want to reinvest in their communities, and they're ready for the next steps to reimagining public safety. And also, sorry, you can also see Scarlett, one of our homies, had a quote on there if you wanted to check that out. But next slide. And here, really, going more in depth into investing in our communities, how we talked about mental health. This is where we needed. We talked about youth programming, public schools. As we know, Oakland has specifically talked about defunding their resources when we can see that police are getting heavily invested in, and our young folks see that. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go over the testimonies that our young folks in that plática actually had in that safe space. And yeah, thank you. And I'm not sure if it's on my end, but I can't hear the audio.
Yeah, we're not able to hear the sound. If you could please correct that. Thank you. And thank you, Christina, for sharing. All we need is more time.
Always.
All right, well, while we're getting our technology together, please feel free, if you have questions, if things have been coming up for you, put them in the question and answer, and we will.
Associate with courage. I was born and raised in East Oakland by Rainbow Park, where the police do not seem to care about anybody's safety. My mom passed away when I was 3 years old. I grew with a lot of anger issues. I was provided with counseling, and they violated my trust. I was labeled the angry Black kid. I told myself at a young age to avoid the police. I do not trust the police because they never treated me like a human being. They never asked me what happened to me. They judge me based on who they think I am. My first incarceration was at 12 years old. I did too much in juvenile hall and 1 year on GPS. And when my grandmother wasn't able to show up due to her disability, they sent me to a group home in Stockton. Instead of helping me, they pushed me further away from the only person who cared about me. Instead of funding police, we need to fund more mentors, internships, and counselors to make a better change in our community.
My name's Scarlett Hernandez Torres, and my experience was when I was 15, like a few months ago, and I had experienced a sexual harassment I had experienced a sexual harassment, injustice, and the police never did anything about it. Also, when I was 8 years old, I was as a criminal um, for walking alone in East Oakland, and what I think that the money that they use in police should be invested in helping people with mental illness or with affordable housing, because there's a lot of people who don't have houses, who don't have a place to live.
Hello, my name is Katarina and I'm a Dream Beyond Bars Fellow at Courage. I'm a former foster youth community organizer and a proud mother. I was just 9 years old the first time somebody called the cops on me. I was living in a group home and they handcuffed me for throwing a roll of paper towels at a staff. What I really needed was somebody to talk to, something to eat, and a hug. Craving connection and family, I continued to run away from placement until the only place left for me was juvenile hall. In the hall, I was treated like a criminal instead of a kid. Even when I got released, there was no time for me to be a kid. Instead of trying out for the basketball team or choosing electives, I was checking with my probation officer and keeping up with court dates. I can testify to the fact that cops don't keep me or my children safe. What keeps us safe is having affordable and dignifying housing, healthy and hearty food, culturally competent healthcare providers, and supportive relationships in the community.
Public safety to me means being able to walk in public without feeling like you're gonna get harassed by the people that are supposed to protect you. Not being killed by the police, things of that nature. Public safety, we keep each other safe, we protect each other. We decided, since we were getting blessed, we wanted to bless people in the community ourselves. We wanted to help out by feeding the homeless, giving them care packages, our houseless brothers and sisters. We gave them waters, pizza, snacks, hygiene, like toothbrushes, toothpaste. We get profiled as being brown and black and by the police, and then like me, myself, like I get profiled, but I feel like I'm doing a lot more than they are towards helping my community.
Hello, I'm Wen. I am an Oakland resident for over 20 years here in Oakland. I grew up as a low-income child where I had lack of affordable housing, good education, and access to mental health services. When my family, who was struggling with domestic violence and substance abuse, our first source of help was police. However, we needed more help. The lack of resources was not afforded to us as we did not know where to go. Until later on in my life, I dealt with this for years that caused severe depression and acts, and where I did not have help until decades later. For me, it's really important growing up as a youth in Oakland that we have our resources more delegated to sources of education, sources to access of organizations like Courage, and also mental health services, affordable housing, where people have resources. Because for me, the things that growing up in Oakland as a low-income person, I could see it was just a lack of resources and need. And I truly believe the best way to do that is reducing the budget and giving back to our communities where we need more help, and we know what we need in our communities and we know what's best.
My name is Aisha Brown. I was born and raised in East Oakland and a current DPB fellow. I was 15 years old when I first became incarcerated. I got called in the wrong place at the wrong time. Due to my defiance, the police sent me to juvie. I spent some time in juvenile justice facility, but upon my release, I was put on GPS. This was a very traumatic experience for me. I became easily triggered in the GPS, only added more charges to my case. I ended up paying money to be on GPS while we were already struggling to make ends meet. By defunding the police, we make room for those community resources, such as more funding towards extracurricular activity to stimulate the youth mind, more programs that teach job skills, and have more mentor programs like Courage. If I had those opportunities from the very beginning, I don't think I would have been incarcerated from the very first place. I am now trying to change the very systems that tried to keep me behind bars, and as someone who has suffered at the hands of the police, I truly believe that the police are not the answer to our community problems.
That was such a powerful film. Thank you so much, Christina. And shout out to all the youth at Courage. It takes a lot of courage to share your stories in that way. Let's keep it going now. Sikander, will you please share with us?
Hey, how you doing? So yeah, shout out to James, and then shout out to Christina and Courage and all the work that they did. My name is Sikander Iqbal. I'm the Deputy Director of Urban Peace Movement. My pronouns are he, him, his. And for people who cannot see the screen, I'm a South Asian male, bald also, but I have a hat to keep my head warm, and I have a goatee, and my mom thinks that I'm handsome. So hopefully that gives you a good visual. I'll go ahead and dive into the presentation once I can see the slides. I don't see the slides.
It's not fun unless we have technical difficulties. There we are.
All right. Thank you. I was worried that I was the only one that couldn't see them. So thank you for getting them up. So what we did at Urban Peace Movement was we focused our community outreach efforts around the Reimagine public safety on engaging Black men from the Flatlands of Oakland. So the Flatlands are the areas that experience the most violence, and not just community violence, but also systemic violence. And these are also meaning that these are the areas that are the most over-policed and the most deprived of access to resources and just resources in general. So when we did our survey, we did it for 1 month from January 4th to February 4th. We took as many COVID precautions as possible, and we administered most of these surveys in person using Google Forms. Yeah, each participant did receive a stipend, and then we also did a focus group. And we have I'll just say we had a lot of findings that were similar to what Courage just shared. Next slide. And a big reason why we did the survey as well is because there was a lot of conversation about what the people wanted in particular neighborhoods that were most impacted by violence. And we felt like it's important that we bring those voices to the table rather than having people claim to speak for those voices, especially if it did not seem like people were presenting what people actually wanted. And so we thought it was important for people to be able to have a say in this process, especially for young Black men who are the most impacted group, impacted by both community and systemic violence. And so we felt like we wanted to make sure we got them involved in the process. 62% of our respondents were between the ages of 19 and 35. 88% had been directly impacted by the criminal justice system. 91% have been directly impacted by violence. When we asked them what their top 3 safety concerns were, that gun violence was number 1, being robbed was number 2, and housing instability and becoming homeless was number 3. We gave them a list of a bunch of ideas about what they feel like could be done to increase safety. There's about 10 options. More police was one of the options, and that was had the least amount of votes. The top 3 votes went to violence prevention programs, good paying jobs, stable quality housing, and then a runner-up for number 4 was addressing root causes of violence. Next slide, please. We opened the survey up asking folks if they feel safe themselves in the city of Oakland, and 68% of them said that they do not feel safe. They either feel unsafe or very unsafe. When we asked them, do they believe that Oakland is a safe place for Black men in general, 87% picked very unsafe and unsafe. So from that, we concluded that of the respondents to the survey, 87% do not feel like Oakland is a safe place for Black men. And that is something that we were hearing in some of the spaces with the Reimagine Public Safety Task Force. But what we'll go into next is kind of where we heard where it was important to bring in these voices. Next slide, please. And so when the comments about people feeling unsafe were first brought up, the people at the city and in the task force were saying that if people don't feel safe, they want more police. And so one of the things we did was we asked the people in the survey if they feel more safe or less safe when they see the police in their community. and 87% of the respondents said they feel less safe when they see the police in their community. The next slide. Some key takeaways were we asked the respondents a list of questions on which type of issues would they want community programs respond to, and which kind of programs would they rather have police still respond to. And you could see for all the ones on the community programming side, there was an overwhelming majority that feel like police should not respond to, but community programs should respond to. Mental health crises, school-related issues, non-physical domestic violence calls, homelessness, security at special events, physical altercations where no weapon is involved, and shoplifting. And then for areas that did have more than 50% of where they felt like police should respond, the number was higher for physical altercation with weapons, physical domestic violence altercations, and then it was about 60-40 or 55-45 for traffic enforcement and check fraud and counterfeit money. Next slide, please. And then for this one, we asked people about funding, right? Because a lot of this means if we want to fund all these other services that will help reduce crime, which we've heard, or crime and violence, which we heard a lot of in the previous two presentations. We asked the people taking the survey for these different areas of that the city could fund. Do you feel like we should have more funding, the same funding, or less funding? And there was an overwhelming call for more money to be directed towards services for and support for homeless populations, violence prevention programs, conflict mediation, restorative justice programs, mental health services, addiction treatment services, general neighborhood services, neighborhood infrastructure, social programs, and non-police emergency response teams. Out of all the options, I didn't put it up here because it was the only one, the only service that had even over 50%, but it was up near 75-80% called to have less funding was for the police department. Next slide, please. And that is our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel so inspired by what you all have been doing in Oakland. It makes me want to move to Oakland. Thank you all for your work. I feel like we just scratched the surface. If you have questions like me, please put them in the chat. We will get to them after we hear from our friends in Austin. So, Austin folks, I know that countless unpaid for hours went into the hard work that you all did in the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force in Austin. So I'd like to get right into it. Paola, I'm going to turn it to you. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank y'all. Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Paola Rojas. Estoy súper agradecida por todas las personas que están aquí hoy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paola Rojas. My pronouns are she, her, ella. And for those of you that can't see me, I am a light-skinned Latina with long brown hair, silver hoop earrings, and a screen that says, "Courage to reimagine. Public safety does not equal policing." I am a mother, I am a midwife, and I'm also a volunteer organizer with CCU, Communities of Color United for Racial Justice, a coalition in Austin, Texas. I guess before jumping into our Reimagining Public Safety Task Force that we're here to talk about tonight, I wanted to kind of rewind for a second to share with you a little bit about how we got to this place for us here in Austin. Next slide, please. I wanted to first give appreciation to the Oakland folks. I learned a lot during your presentation, and what it brings up for me is that I know there's many other local efforts around the country that have been working on this for years in different configurations, and we are one of those. I wanted to see if maybe by me sharing a little bit about what's particular about Austin, that can add to some kind of strategic thinking for all of us in different cities as we're trying to figure out how to move this work forward. So CCU, we are an all volunteer grassroots coalition made up of BIPOC grassroots organizations, small grassroots organizations, as well as individuals. We've been working together since 2014. And actually what sparked us to think about impacting our city budget was that our city was an at-large city council, which meant that every city council member had to be voted by the city at large. And in 2015, there was redistricting that created geographic opportunity districts of 10 geographic districts, where we felt, those of us doing organizing locally, that we could get a handle and have enough power to push things on a city level in a way that we hadn't been able to before. So we started to look at the city budget back then. And like many of you already know, or maybe already knew, we didn't know that in Austin, almost half of the city's budget was going to policing at the time. And Austin is a low crime city with very high paid police officers. And we started to dig and realize that it hadn't always been this way, but that we were, in this very wealthy city, putting half of our city's money towards policing. So we started to try to push with a number of different campaigns. The first thing we did is we passed a resolution in 2015 on Mother's Day, where we said we want more than flowers and cards on Mother's Day. We actually want to redistribute wealth in the city. And we started to have small listening sessions and gatherings throughout the city of the base and members of our different member organizations to think about what would we want our city budget to be going to. So by 2016, we developed a 10-point platform, kind of nodding homage to the Black Panther Party, of the 10 points of where we wanted our city to invest and where we wanted to get the money from in order to do that. So what we really understood at the time was that it wasn't just about policing, and that, the police is basically, if you see in our image, kind of like one arm of a larger monster. So the heavy-handed armed thugs of a bigger system. And in the local case of Austin, a city government that is prioritizing corporations to move in, giving incentives to corporations like Samsung, Apple, Merck Pharmaceuticals, millions of dollars to those corporations, and contributing to the displacement of the community of Austin, Black and brown folks who've been there for multiple generations that can no longer afford to live there. And the role of the police is triangulated in that larger work of this monster, where the police association and the lobby of the developers, so the real estate developers, had built so much power, economic power and pressure, that kept city council kind of giving all of this money to the police, which makes it seem more desirable for people to move to Austin from East Coast and West Coast to come work for these corporations. So that's what we started to try to tackle. We passed a resolution to create an equity tool in the city that would examine critically policy decisions as well as the budget. And that led to the creation of the Equity Office. And Kelly will speak in a couple of minutes about that within our city. And since then, each year we kind of built the pressure, and it was always two-pronged. One is, this is what we want in terms of communities' needs, basic needs that people need in relation to low-income housing, public health, after-school programs, et cetera. And where we're going to take the money from was from the police. what we were able to do since 2015 till 2020 was mostly to slow down the growth of the police. We weren't able to fully defund, except for 1 year. We were able to take a 1% from the police budget and move it directly to the health department in 2016. That was one defunding, but every other year it was mostly a shaving of how much the increase they would get. We were able to reduce the increase that they wanted. And we've been holding that line every year. The health department has doubled since we started this work, but 2020 kind of moved things qualitatively for us. And next slide, please. So this is Austin's 2020 general fund budget. If you look at the blue, 40% towards the police. This looks bad, but it was worse when we started, but you can still see that the percentage public health at the time was 1/10 of the police department when we started, and now it's it's grown, but we still have a long way to go. And in all the other areas that we've been pushing for every year, we have small bumps, but then the convergence of the uprisings nationally last summer, as well as the local protest in Austin, as well as the ongoing kind of chipping away work that we had been doing for years, came together, and we were able to have the first more substantial defunding of police of $21 million that was directly cut last August, and between 130 and 150 million that was set aside, taken from the police budget of 430 million, but kind of put into a side pocket where it's been sitting since then, with this idea that there would be some process to determine what to do with that money. And that's where this Reimagining Public Safety Task Force came to be in Austin. The city manager created this idea, and we knew that in a way it was a way to kind of appease and squash a lot of the pressure and the protests that were happening by creating this process. Our organization, CCU, was not really interested in participating. Many grassroots organizations were invited, and we were, we were skeptical. But the fact that the equity office, which is something that we fought to create and have people working there who we trust, who have been really pushing the city, the equity office was part of the Reimagining Public Safety, is what made us decide to go ahead and jump in. I guess I wanted to say, never with the kind of expectation that this is going to be the vehicle for us to make the change we want to make, but that it's one of many kind of potential theaters or spaces of where we can advance our vision. So I want to pass the mic to Kelly, who can talk to you a little bit more about our task force in Austin.
All right, thanks, Paola. Can y'all hear me?
We can.
Oh, good. Okay. Hi, y'all. My name is Kelly, and I work for the city of Austin, and I'm really grateful that Paola, Ashley, and Gabriela invited me to be a part of this. And I'm going to share a little bit about the city side of all this. And so my pronouns are she, her, hers. When we got the information, when the city manager decided that, it was actually the deputy city manager decided that this was going to happen, she reached out to us and asked, to recommend organizations. And I knew that a lot of these organizations were going to be very skeptical, because at the time, right before George Floyd was killed, a young man named Mike Ramos was killed here in Austin that I actually knew. And community was done. And so no one was going to work with the city as long as the chief of police was still in his position. And so it was really hard to go to community and ask folks to participate. So we tried to vet this as much as we could from the equity office's perspective to just see what it was all about. And we thought it was an opportunity to just even to imagine what could be possible, right? And to find out, you know, what people were thinking about what, you know, public safety should be. And so these are some of the organizations that we brought in. We had like the Urban League. We had some cultural organizations like the Austin Asian Community Health Initiative. We had the Texas Fair Defense Project. We had GAVA, ALGO, which is a queer people of color organization. We had a mental health authority, Integral Care. We had Texas Appleseed. They do a lot of work around youth incarceration. Grassroots Leadership, national organization, and Survivor Justice Project, NAACP, Just Liberty, and Austin Justice Coalition. We had the Greater Austin Crime Commission, and we had CCU, we had the ACLU, and we had ICE Fuera de Austin, and the Texas Harm Reduction Alliance. And so it was hard to get people to the table at first. And when it first started, the facilitator we had was an organization called 21st Century Policing. And there was some pushback by some of the task force members because it's an organization that worked with, you know, President Obama on policing, and it's made up of its leadership anyway is made up of several, you know, police officers. And so there was some pushback around that, and we ended up shifting to me and another person on our team, Maya, facilitating these conversations. And then we ended up hiring, thank goodness, a facilitator who did an amazing job out of New Orleans. Her name is, or their name is Rosana Cruz. And they did an awesome job. And so for the process, we really tried to take time to root ourselves in the history and also force this process of building some shared values. Can we go to the next slide? I wanted to talk a little bit about the money because I think nationally, Austin got a lot of like accolades because we were actually moving money. But it wasn't what it sounded like, right? So as you can see, we had some money that was, you know, going to be removed and sort of reinvested. And then 76.6 million was gonna, they call that decoupling, right? Where they were going to put like HR in other places and just figure out a way to move folks so that there was some weird reporting in the police department where sworn officers were supervising civilians and things that just didn't make sense. And so that's what that pot was around. And then there was also, you know, the Reimagine Fund, which was going to look at some of the recommendations, or we were hoping would be how we would the money that we would spend on the recommendations that the task force came up with. Can we go to the next slide? And this is just a picture of the timeline that we used to, we spent a long time researching and building out this extensive timeline around policing. And we start off, you know, really at the beginning, right, of policing. But then as we get closer to, you know, the current day we're in now, we got more local. So it's a really interesting timeline, and I would encourage people to look at it. But we spent a whole meeting, like 4 hours, going over this history with the whole task force, right? And there was pushback, but at the end of it, we were able to basically agree, come to a consensus that this was not something that we wanted to perpetuate, right? And something that we wanted to interrupt. And so, can I go to the next slide? We also came up, this is the values document that we came up with. It also has, you know, some definitions too, but we really tried to set the stage of how we wanted to work with each other, and then how we wanted the work that we produced to orient to the public, right, to community folks. And so, you know, things like centering people most negatively impacted, right, and things like that were central to the work we were doing. So we would ask questions. Okay, I'll hurry. We would ask questions around recommendations or conversations we were having, you know, to make sure that what we were coming up with was aligned with these values, and also sort of an intervention to the history. And so anyway, these are some of the working groups we had. Patrol and surveillance, violence survivor services and prevention, meaningful community engagement, the equity reinvestment in community work group, uprooting punitive and harm culture and intersecting systems, the public health reinvestment group, police staffing, patrol and criminal investigations, and reimagining 911 and non-police crisis response. And some of the things that we came up with were like a grant program with fewer barriers, because it's hard to contract with cities, for, you know, organizations on the ground to get dollars to build public safety responses within communities who are being most directly impacted. There was one around community health workers responding to the nonviolent calls. There was also one around, you know, like our police department automatically calls CPS if there is if there's a domestic violence call, even if the child isn't there. And so they were, you know, people wanted that to change because we have all these disproportionate outcomes around CPS. And so these were some of the things that were proposed through this process and vetted actually through the whole task force. Next slide. And this is the report that came out after, that was written by Ina Ganguly in the Equity Office. Basically, we put together all the recommendations. You should check it out. It's pretty thorough. The task force members wrote it, and then we gave some context and some history. And so we're in the process now of doing like a feasibility process. We really are going to try and get some of these taken care of. There is a bill in the Texas Senate that is, I don't know if y'all seen it, but it's trying to force larger cities in Texas to refund our police departments back to their 2019-2020 budgets. And it's, yeah, so we're still going to push through and see what we can get done. And we should be hopefully seeing this come up in our next budget process. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Gabriela. Thank you for your time.
Gabriela, are you with us? You're on mute. We're missing all this brilliance.
Hola, disculpe. Gracias, Kelly, por todo. Y bueno, yo estaré presentando en español. Buenas tardes y noches a todos. Mi nombre es Gabriela y mi pronombre es ella. Soy organizadora de organizadora comunitaria de CCU, y estoy hablando desde territorio indígena Sana, Tonkawa y Coahuiltecán, que ahora se conoce como Austin, Texas. Para quienes no me pueden ver, soy una mujer mexicana de piel clara, tengo cabello negro, utilizo aretes de círculo, color dorado, y hay una pantalla detrás de mí que a mí me cuidan mis amigas, no la policía. Y estoy vestida de color rosa. Primero quiero agradecerle mucho a PolicyLink por este espacio para poder compartir con todos ustedes. Y también quiero señalar que detrás de mi voz está la de todas las familias y comunidades con las cuales nos organizamos como colectivo. Estas son las mismas familias y comunidades que guían nuestros pasos al andar. Y bueno, queremos hablar un poco de la importancia de analizar, desmantelar, pero también de construir con las comunidades a las cuales pertenecemos, las que nos rodean y en especial con las que son directamente impactadas y afectadas por la explotación, represión, el despojo y el desprecio. Esto es algo que valoramos como fundamental en nuestros movimientos, pero en especial cuando pensamos en la idea de construir un mundo, un mundo que queremos. Frente al grupo de trabajo Reimaginando la Seguridad Pública, para nosotros en CSU y nosotras, fue importante consultar con nuestras bases comunitarias, ya que son las más perjudicadas por la policía y conocen mejor que nadie lo que más necesitan para tener una vida digna, tener una vida segura. Dado que estamos en medio de una pandemia global, la verdad es que tuvimos que adaptar y cambiar la forma en la cual nos comunicamos. Y esto alargó nuestras conversaciones, nuestra planeación, pero sin la voz directa de la gente, del pueblo, hubiera sido una apropiación de experiencias. Y hicimos muchas llamadas y reuniones telefónicas o sin línea, y para muchas y muchos de nosotros aquí quizás no lo pensamos, pero este proceso también implicó mucha educación alrededor de cómo utilizar distintos tipos de tecnología. En el primer proyecto que hicimos en el marco de este proceso de Reimaginando la Seguridad Pública fue juntar testimonios y experiencias en voz y en persona de nuestras bases. Y este video tuvo como objetivo darle luz a lo que las y los integrantes de Austin necesitan para sentirse seguros. Les preguntamos a varios miembros de la comunidad local, primero, lo que cambiarían en su ciudad para mejorar la vida, no solamente de ellas y ellos, pero también de sus familias y de sus barrios, qué tipo de apoyo necesitan en su comunidad para sentirse seguras y seguros. Y por último, también les preguntamos sobre los estreses que tienen en sus vidas diarias. Y nos enfocamos en estos tipos de preguntas para destacar las realidades que viven, porque desde allí valoramos que tendría que venir el cambio verdadero, ¿no? Ojalá y tenga un poco de tiempo, pero me gustaría compartir con ustedes un pequeño clip del video que mencioné, que está aquí. Ojalá y lo podamos ver. Is there any way that we can click play on that? And we're going to show just a short clip of it, but I don't see that we can. From 3:48 to 6:17, can we do that?
All right, we're trying to pull up this link. And while we are, please put your questions in the chat. If you are looking for the links to the reports, we will send them out afterwards. Not to worry if you missed them in the chat. Keep your questions coming. Put them in the question and answer, and I will try to get them all answered. All we need is more time. So we are trying to pull up this video right now. Gabriella or Ashley, do you want to continue talking while we work out this video piece?
Sí, claro. Sí, claro, pues solamente quiero señalar que muchas de las experiencias que están sistematizadas a través de este video son muy, muy similares. Existen falta de recursos para las familias y las personas y como bien han señalado mis compañeras anteriormente, el dinero está allí de la ciudad, no hace falta. La ciudad lo tiene, pero decide de manera activa invertirlo en la policía, que al final, como han dicho los compas y las compas de Oakland, abusan y desprecian de los habitantes en nuestra ciudad. Y lo que nuestra comunidad necesita es muy claro. Hay que invertir en la gente, en el pueblo. Y bueno, si no podemos ver el clip del video, no pasa nada, también se los podemos compartir, pero vamos a intentarlo de todas formas.
Since we're having some technical difficulties, I promise to send it as part of our follow-up email. Let's continue on so we can get to some of these questions in the rest of your presentation. Gabriella, Ashley, are you there?
I'm here. Gabriella, are you done?
Yes, hon. Sorry about that. I forgot to pass that on in English.
No problem. Hello, all. My name is Ashley. I go by the pronouns she, her, and hers. For those who cannot see me, I am an African-American woman with gold hoops, long golden brown locks, and I'm wearing a Black blouse. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about the process. A while back, we hosted a community listening session. We had a live televised listening session for the community to ensure that the city not only heard from the task force, but actually heard from those directly impacted community folks that we mentioned earlier. We took the time to open this up to not only receive testimony, recorded, live, and even a written response. As many of you know, oftentimes community members feel left out and aren't able to go to city council or even participate in these types of actions. Why? Because it's things like limited schedule, traveling, just time period. So we wanted to ensure that the task force wasn't the only one speaking for the community, that we did in fact actually include the community. It was extremely important to uplift their voices in a time that was apparent where we're continuously being left out. And I say we because this is a community that I'm also a part of and directly impacted as well. Right now is a really critical time in Austin because we have pending recommendations and the funding for these recommendations, we've received extreme backlash from the state. We've really taken the time out to put together this call of action to ask that everyone stand with us and kind of help support this movement that we're working towards. We're asking that everyone take action by signing the pledge. If everyone has a moment to read over this with me, and for those that are helping me, can we go to the link with the call of action? We need everyone from all over the country to stand with us, as Austin is just an example of what can transpire everywhere else. Let's see. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if you were done. Thank you so much. Do you have more?
Oh, we were just gonna go over the pledge, but we can also just...
Yeah, please, walk us through it.
Okay, so we the pledge states that push myself to challenge the cop in my head and imagine another world is absolutely possible where we can live without armed police forces and law enforcement that surveil punish, and cage us to keep our communities in order. Instead, we will create community safety with culturally grounded and caring mutual support and a deep redistribution of private and public resources. Build collective power with others across the country to move toward the horizon of what is possible. We ask that join in local organizing in my community. We will take steps in a local struggle where we concretely reduce, defund, and or dismantle the police and move us all forward. Austin, Texas is one of many places. Support the work in Austin, Texas right now. Austin is one stake in the ground of possibility and experimentation and a testing ground for our shared visions. It is the city that has made the biggest cut to the local police budget. While the gains were made possible by the pressure of years of local organizing, what was passed on paper has yet to be implemented. Support the grassroots efforts of CCU and grassroots leadership and divest from Austin Police Department and invest in all resources into the basic community needs of low income housing, guaranteed monthly income. Ongoing work is guided by the experience. The experience and vision of Black, Indigenous people of color communities most directly harmed by policing. The summer 2020 upsprings, both nationally and locally, along with the community-led pressure since 2015. Pushed the city of Austin to cut the police budget. They approved a 5% budget cut of $21 million immediately. The remaining cut was put in a side pocket, $121 million in a decoupled budget and $49 million in a Reimagine public safety fund. The final decisions on how this amount of over $150 million set aside from the police budget will be spent has yet to be finalized and is in the process right now. We do ask that everyone join us by signing this pledge and continuing to support us in our efforts in trying to defund Austin Police Department. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Austin crew. The pledge is in the chat, and we will also be emailing it to you. So please sign the pledge and support our friends in Austin. So I want to get into these questions. There's really great questions in the chat. I also have some of my own. Thank you all for your presentation. I know it's very difficult in these Zoom streets, but we made it through. I appreciate you. All we needed was more time to hear all of you. So hopefully we can get more into things in this portion of our program. I want to start with James, if I can. James, will you tell us about how you were able to navigate abolition versus reform calls in the city? There's also a question in the chat about what kinds of tension you got from the unions, affluent communities, and right-wing groups. So I know that's really broad and I put two things together, but if you will, please try your best to answer.
That's a great question. It was difficult, as it always is, to navigate all of the folks who have to come together to make this work. We have a history of working with labor unions in the city of Oakland, and so those relationships were not new. And that was very important during this process because we had a lot of conversations about what services can be transferred over and how that could happen in the face of a hostile administration that wanted to maintain a status quo and continue to fund law enforcement. And so our primary strategy engaging in the task force was to create a big tent. Right, we're abolitionists, and so we know our goal is creating an entirely new system of public safety. And we know that since 2016, Defund OPD has been a campaign that focuses on points of unity, right? Because we know that there are a lot of things that police do that if the people really knew about it, they'd agree that the police shouldn't be doing. And there's a lot of loopholes and contract exploitation that happens that costs our city millions and millions of dollars as well. And so the first phase of Defund OPD has always been to go after what we consider low-hanging fruit, you know, the millions and millions of dollars that in policing things that shouldn't be policed, like traffic or mental health or medical or animal control or issues like that. And then to the rampant contract abuse that costs the city tens of millions of dollars per year.
Thank you for that, James. I want to now switch over. This is the nice part about being in Zoom. We can jump from Oakland to Austin. So I'm going to jump to Austin. And Kelly, I wanted to ask you about the role the Equity Office played. It was such a strategic role in the task force. Can you talk a little bit about how this process ties into your larger vision of equity in Austin? And because I like 2 for 1, Miss Sue in the chat also wants to know about how Austin's Equity Office is really addressing economic disparity. So those are 2 different questions, but hopefully because
they're related.
Yeah,
right?
you can link the 2 of them together.
I think it's if I felt like Paula did a really good job explaining how all of that is really connected when she talked about that image. And I mean, our work is it's weird being inside of an institution. Like, I'm born and raised in Austin, right? And so it's a strange thing. But, our city didn't wake up one day and say, oh, we want to be equitable. Let's get an equity office, right? Like, the community folks organized and pushed and basically forced them to do it. And they heard it was a thing, right? And so they did it. And it could have easily just been like a window dressing. And we work really hard to not be that. And I think this fits in because it was really sort of the line in the sand. You know what I'm saying? Like, where are we at? Who are we with? And we try to make it clear that we publish these reports every year around racial profiling. We've done an equity assessment, an initial one of certain divisions in the police department, and the outcomes are just bad, right? It's not working. And so I think that it fits in perfectly because we know that that what communities of color and poor folks experience from police it's not helping those communities, right? The history, I mean, it's a hard thing, I think, and not a popular one in the city. But it's what it is, right? So we just, we feel accountable to the folks who aren't golfing with the mayor and who, who aren't necessarily connected to people who can make those decisions. So we do our best to do what's right, and I think as far as, economic equity, economic justice, we've been working really hard and actually feel like this is one step towards that, right? If we were more critical, we've actually been doing a lot of work with our economic development department overall. But there is a connection, right, to the deep inequities and all of the prosperity in Austin, right? All of the money, all of the corporations. And we try to highlight that. We try to talk about, what it means for our communities to being displaced, right? The number one factor for getting displaced in Austin is being Black, period. Over 42% of our homeless population, people experiencing homelessness, our homeless brothers and sisters are Black. We make up 7%, Black people make up 7% of Austin on a good day, right? And so what does that mean? And I mean, we're not an office that has like teeth where we can like, boom, injunction, you will not do that. But we use our relationships and really try to influence decisions, and we try to intervene as much as we can. I think this was the first time where there was clear, because right after we were in a meeting on a Wednesday, and then we're told that there weren't going to be any staff recommendations. I'll hurry up. I'm sorry, Sarah. There weren't going to be any staff recommendations. And then on a Friday, we got an email from city management saying that they were moving forward with a cadet academy that had been suspended, right? And so, you know, we trying.
Hey, you know, trying is more than some cities can say. So having your lens and your voice in the city seems to be a critical and crucial point in moving this work forward. And just based on what you were saying, I wanted to go to you, Ashley. What would it mean if these recommendations were passed for Austin community members? What would that mean for community members in your community?
Well, Sarah, I would have to say, most importantly, it would give that sense to our community members that they were actually heard, because a lot of this say-so came directly from community members. They actually participated in this feedback and recommendations that were submitted. So being able to implement something that was actually presented by us would be so much more empowering, letting them know that, one, you can actually utilize your voice to actually make a strong change, but then also on a much larger scale, start reflecting the fact that, as my background states, safety begins with the community, letting the community know that we're now present and we can continue to build within ourselves. We don't have to necessarily utilize the police because we don't need to be policed. You know, these particular recommendations would help with their quality of life. I'm speaking for myself included. These recommendations would absolutely mean that this is only the beginning and we can continue to take back some of that community power that has been lost over the years.
So I know it seems like I'm playing favorites, but one more question for Austin before we go back to Oakland. Paola, can you talk about how, to Ashley's point, in terms of the lived reality of what this means for community members, what does this task force mean in your larger vision for public safety in Austin? How does this play a part?
Okay. That's a good question. I think I just want to first say for us to all together take a step back of this moment that we're in. And for me, I've been working on police and alternatives to policing since I was a youth, and it's been almost 30 years. So it's a long time. And never in my lifetime did I think we would have an opening like we've had in this last year, with the questioning and call to possibly defund police has become mainstream, right? I mean, this is something that I didn't think was ever going to happen. And so it has created a window for all of us that we never had before. And so the question is, how do we use that crack in the door and, you know, push the door open? And I don't think that the task force for us is that, but what it gave us, it was in a moment of time where this question of even reimagining, you know, something that we've been pushing for so many years, to start with ourselves, of the, you know, the cop in our own heads that doesn't even allow us to imagine that we could do this differently without the cops, but that we could have a process, a formal process where our Reimagining public safety meetings, we said from the first meeting, public, it's not us reps in a room with you heads of city. It has to be open to the public, televised, Facebook, live streamed, with interpretation. All these meetings, all these conversations, it's not us. We're not going to broker something with you, city. We have to kind of open that up. So the fact that it's been that kind of a process where lots of regular folks have been watching and hearing what's happening is really the value to me of the task force, creating kind of a stage or a theater for us to do this. And then also the actual recommendations, y'all, they're amazing. Like Ashley was saying, a lot of folks participated. besides us on the task force, in all the working groups, and then all the listening sessions. I know I've facilitated a few, but many others with lots of, for me, mothers, low-income Black and brown mothers. What does safety mean to you? What would it mean? And I would love it if y'all read our recommendations. We're talking about guaranteed monthly income. We're talking about something that is, can you imagine a different kind of workforce? Because we're seeing a workforce development pipeline that would be community health workers from communities instead of police, because it is a way that people get, Black and brown working class folks get into law enforcement, because you get a stable income and benefits, et cetera. So I think we've created amazing recommendations through this process. And really the task force isn't what matters. It's the vision that is now in these recommendations and how we keep moving them forward. And the last little thing I'll say is another call to action is, as we're pushing that, the state of Texas is backlashing quickly to try to pass a law this coming week to say that no city in Austin can reduce police funding or cut the number of officers, right? So they're coming down hard against us. And someone can put in the chat, we have a postcard that we want people from all over the country to sign and be like, we're watching you from whatever city, Mayor of Austin, as you're making these decisions, because according to the Equity Office, a bunch of these recommendations are really on the table to possibly go through for us right now.
Thank you so much for that, Paola. So we'll make sure in the chat that postcard is in there. Everyone, send those postcards. Keep your eyes on Texas. And now we got to go back to the Bay. I got love for the Bay. I want to start with Christina, since Paola was talking about starting as a youth organizer. I really want to hear about why it's important for youth voices to be part of this process and your personal experience in this work.
So can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay, beautiful, thank you. So for surely, I did come into these spaces as a young community activist, really getting to see the realities in my community, and also, being in their positions when I was younger, but really, I heavily believe that it's hella important to have young people in these types of spaces, because they are the ones being heavily impacted by that. We see that, we know it, and we hear it all the time. Young folks are reimagining public safety, right? And this is something that's not new to them. This is something that they've seen in their communities. And to have them in that space, in this space, is hella important, because they got hella much to say. As we've seen in their testimonies, they are being, targeted. That trauma lingers with them. And that's why we continue to do this work, right? Because we believe that there are next generations. They're the ones that are going to be holding these spaces that we're holding right now. So in order for that to happen, we have to amplify those voices, right? And without them, all of this work goes nowhere, right? To keep it a buck with y'all, because we're having these conversations, but when they're left out, where's our conversation really going to go? Because that's our community. Those are our folks, right? So I believe that, and I know that when we have young folks in these types of spaces, a lot is being made. Their voices are being heard. And that's when we really get into reimagining public safety, because they bring the ideas, right? And I'm not saying that we don't have ideas, that we're, older and we just have nothing to think of, but they're the ones living through it right now. We're talking about young folks having firsthand experience to police in schools, right? And that's something that had been brought up in the plática that we had, which, I very much was honored to be in, because like I said, they were reopening their wounds and they were really creating that safe space for other young folks to bring in their ideas of where we can redirect those funds, right? So young folks are our next generation, are our leaders. And I'm honored to say that, because when, thankfully, because of my mentors, they took that time and space to really teach me and to really, up my game of what's refunding communities look like. So for us to do that now, and I see hella hella young folks in this space. So, you know, shout out and much love to y'all from the Bay Area to Texas, to everybody joining our space. I see some of my homies in this space, and I'm just so like blessed to see y'all, because it shows like, yo, like we're speaking and they're listening, and they're gonna do the teaching next, right? So for the young folks in this space, I'm hella honored to be here with y'all, and for y'all to receive all this dope, I don't know if I can cuss, I'm sorry, this dope knowledge that we're all giving out. But yes, the young folks are our next leaders. So that's my piece.
Thank you. I think cuss words are seasoning, so it always just makes stuff flavorful and tastes good. So I'm with it. Sikander, I want to go to you to talk a little bit more about your survey. I know in Oakland and in Austin and across the country, sometimes there is a tension between our communities, particularly our Black communities that have been divested from, feeling like you're taking away the only resource we have in the police, and that energy showing up in the room. Can you talk about how your approach to community engagement, how you approach community engagement within this context and within this understanding?
Yeah, so I think, well, first is, I think we were able to do this not because like there's some secret formula to it, but because it's work that is tied into what we've been doing for a long time. And so I think I seen somebody in the chat asking about how to organize the communities and get them engaged. Like a lot of it is based on relationship building. Like if you've been out there doing real work, you know, like people aren't, you know, it's easier to do it that way. Like you already have the relationships. But I would also say as an organizer, it's not just contingent on that. So if you haven't been doing work, or there aren't organizations that have been in touch with people for years, there's always ways to connect with people. Like there's always some form of leadership in different spaces, in different communities. So it's really about just putting the time and energy and effort in to go find and connect with those people and actually hear from them what their concerns are, what their issues are, right? And so sometimes that could be, and then just making sure you're providing information to them so they can come up with their own conclusions. Like they know what's going on, but the only thing you really have to combat is if they're fed misinformation, which is something we deal with a lot. So I'll say when we went and did we didn't do a lot of like context building or providing people information. We didn't have the time for that because the pace that everything was moving. So we just did flat out surveys with people. And so everything you saw in ours was just based off of people's, just their immediate reactions. And so like, even when I looked at the results, I didn't even agree 100% with the results. But that wasn't as important as allowing people to have a space to speak to their actual experiences, because what we were seeing happen is that people were making false claims about the wants and needs of people in the community, particularly Black men in the Flatlands of Oakland. Because a lot of times, not a lot of times, but often anywhere you go in the country, people will talk about Black men as the perpetrators of violence. But the truth is they're primarily the victims of violence, and not just community violence, but also systemic violence. So we felt like it was important to bring them to the table because we do a lot of work in these neighborhoods and we do a lot of work with young Black men. And so when we hear people saying stuff that doesn't align with what we're hearing, we thought it was important to provide a space for them to come as well. They weren't available. A few of the young men I work with weren't available to come today. And one of the main person who helped with the surveys was born and raised in one of the Flatland neighborhoods. He's actually transitioned to go work as a violence interrupter with the city, which is perfect because those are the type of jobs that we're asking for when we're saying defund, and just dispelling myths like, and that to me, that's the other piece of it, right? That's like on the back end, because when you start doing the work, you start hearing what misinformation people have received, and you do have a responsibility to correct those things, right? Like we've had our mayor come out and say, there was a poll done in the fall of last year saying that people want the same or more presence of police in their neighborhoods. But that's one question that was asked in isolation, and there's no alternatives offered with that. And so it does come off like, oh, you want to take away the only thing we have to help deal with these problems that we have, but there's no other context around that. But if you look at the rest of the survey, there are questions in there where 80% of participants in their survey said that they would rather see all private, nonprofit, and community-based services conduct a whole host of, I don't have it in front of me, James is better at this part of the story, but sharing, like, they listed out all the same stuff you've seen in the survey. They said, these are all things we would rather have community-based organizations or private companies do rather than have police do. And that's the same survey, but the mayor only chose to share a piece of that. That's just like there's a Gallup poll too that conservatives love to push around, where they say something like 70% or something of Black people want the same thing. They want the same or more presence of police in their neighborhood. But that same survey, if you look at the actual survey, says that only 19% of Black people who took the survey even feel confident in the police to do their job. And when you pull all the data together, more than 50% of people, upwards of 60 plus, want to defund police in their city and move money into other services and resources. That's across the board. And so they're doing statistical gymnastics to try and push back on these things because they have other commitments or reasoning for wanting police to be in our neighborhoods, to police Black and brown bodies and keep things the way that they are. But that hasn't worked for us. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm over time, is one of the comments you hear a lot is, oh, well, look, the police would come out and start saying, oh, well, they want to defund the police. Look, crime has spiked. Crime has spiked everywhere, and it's not because of police being defunded, because police haven't been defunded yet, but crime is still spiking. And it spiked everywhere in the country pretty much and around the same time period, which is really because all these social ills that we want funding to address have been exacerbated during the coronavirus and the shutdown and the lockdown. And so that is actually really is more evidence for why we need to dedicate more funding to the services that all the people in all the surveys and from all the organizations are asking for. So
you weren't over time, you were right on time. I think there are so many powerful points in there, and it's a real reminder to really get into that data and look at what it's really saying, because a lot of times the headlines that we hear about it don't reflect what is actually happening. So I want to jump back over to Austin real quick. Gabriela, to Kander's points, what do the community folks in Austin feel about the recommendations? Paola alluded to a few of them, but what are people on the ground thinking about these recommendations coming out of Austin?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, like Paola said, the recommendations are great. They're beautiful. We want to see them being passed, but I think that our community has, some things very clear, and that is that we cannot count on, unfortunately, we can't count on our city to provide us with the basic necessities. I mean, we're pushing for very basic things like housing, access to healthcare, food, for example. And I mean, one very recent example and painful one too was when our city was hit by the winter storm that was declared a natural disaster. And we lost people during that time. We lost too many because our communities were not warned, they weren't evacuated, and they weren't given aid or support from the actual, government. Who showed up for folks during that time? Our neighbors and our friends did for each other. We gave each other a place to stay if we had electricity, a shower if we had water, and a meal if we had food. And this is why communities continue to work and build together collectively. We don't have another choice. The recommendations, like as Ashley said, as Paola said, and as Kelly said as well, were made possible from our community's insight, our community's experiences, and their visions of what we want. And these recommendations were finally recognized and are being considered because of the pressure by the local community. This is to say that the community is invested in each other. We're in solidarity and showing up for one another. And the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, as Paola said, was an opportunity to amplify and shed more light to the voices and the realities of those directly impacted. But it's not where the work started, and it's not where the work will end. And they're aware that we must keep fighting and pushing for the world that we need. And while community members are pushing for the recommendations to pass, they are also focused on continuing to show up for one another.
That's beautiful. I was part of the storm too, and it's true. We kept each other safe. We kept each other warm. So Anand, I'm going to pull you in. You were a facilitator on the task force in Oakland. And can you share what other folks who are forming task forces in their city should consider in this process from a facilitator point of view?
Yeah, thanks, sir. And as I mentioned in the opening, we will definitely have more details in a report that's coming out this summer related to the facilitator perspective. But I think ultimately, like I spoke a little bit about some of the misunderstandings and co-optation of what reimagining public safety really means. And one of the most critical elements in Oakland in particular, and I know the values and principles in Austin may have played a similar role, was that City Council passed a resolution that very clearly dictated the result of the task force. It was to develop recommendations to divest 50% of the general fund allocation to the Oakland Police Department and develop recommendations to invest that money instead in addressing the root causes of harm and violence and in creating alternatives to police. And so that gave us the ability to really lean into that and to try to redirect folks if they were intentionally or unintentionally focused on other things like police reform or on whether we should actually be doing this or not. That wasn't really a question for me as a facilitator of the task force. The goal of the task force was very clear. So in our surveying, in our design of community engagement, for example, we weren't trying to figure out if folks wanted this or not. The resolution gave us the goal. It was really about how do we do this? What are the recommendations that really move us forward? And that, to me, gave us the necessary cover to hold true to what reimagining public safety really is. And I don't know, Kelly and Paola, I know you sort of played a temporary facilitator role in Austin and maybe had something similar with the values, but this is a critical foundational element that anyone creating a task force, I think, needs to definitely incorporate.
As someone who didn't have that, it would have been great to have that.
I'll say too, there was a question in the Q&A about opposition. So opposition from affluent folks, for example, et cetera. And I think that was one way we were able to address that. For us, opponents weren't really relevant to our goal, right? We needed to develop recommendations to actually invest this money. And the city council needs to figure out whether they, and the task force approved those recommendations. And now the city council needs to figure out if they're actually going to implement the recommendations or not. Opposition can voice, that sentiment now if they choose to, but that wasn't the goal of the task force. And we don't want to get distracted by that.
Thank you for that, Anand. We don't have enough time, y'all. I wish we could stay all night, but I know we have other obligations. So I'm going to do this really quickly. I want to do a real last final word from each of you, a real quick round robin, 1 minute. We'll start with James. We'll go through Oakland and we'll end up at Austin, and then I'll close us out. So James, final words.
Yeah, just shout out to all the incredible work. I appreciate how it was said, this is kind of like the visible part of the iceberg is the task force, and the rest of the iceberg is all the work that has been done to get us to this point. So shout out to that. And then second, I'll say our administration is hostile in Oakland and want to maintain a status quo when it comes to policing. And what has been our greatest advantage is that as organizers, we can't move faster than the speed of the people, right? We're not allowed to. We have to be honest and we have to move with the people, right? And in this engagement, that's the strongest position you can take, right? We were honest about policing. We were honest about what we were bringing to the table. And in that spirit, we were able to deflect anyone who was trying to derail or be disingenuous in the process, because we're always willing to have the conversation, right? And always willing to have the conversation. And so I encourage folks who are attempting to engage in this to educate yourselves as much as possible on your budget, the history of your city and your people, and the opportunities in front of you, because there are a lot of hard conversations that you need to make a lot of space for if this is going to be successful.
Thank you. Sikander, jump in, rapid fire, let's go.
I just say it's been an honor to continue to be a part of this process. And I think just finding different people to play different roles, like engaging young people, engaging voters, engaging even affluent communities. One of the things that was, one of the things that I feel like helped the most was the work that a lot of the research that James and APTP did, like that was really helpful to dispel a lot of the myths, because the two biggest things we'll run into when we talk to people about defund, even in our communities, is people have this irrational fear of being victimized, which comes from the fear-driven narratives from the police. And then also that couples with the romanticization of what police do, right? It's like, well, if there's no police, who's going to do X, Y, and Z? And people always jump to not having police tomorrow. And I think it's just trying to really push and remind people that it's a process, and that wherever you are, we need to go on this process together, and letting people know that the idea is to increase safety, because safety has not increased in any of our spaces, and we're still dealing with the same things we've been dealing with for decades and generations. So if we really want to create safety, let's go on this journey together. And last, I'd say, especially thinking about for our families in Texas, like one of the other things that come up from people who think that they're on the fence, quote unquote, is like, well, what do you think about the Second Amendment? And I can't imagine that you haven't heard that a lot, right? Like now everybody's like, oh, there's no police. Okay, cool. So let us have guns. And they think that they're going to go out there and be, George Zimmerman's or whatever. And so that is something to be mindful of, and continue to push back on letting people take control of the narrative and making it a conversation about guns rights, because this is not about people needing to, become Batman. This is about people needing to, not need Batmans, right? You just have people have the resources and support that they need. And most, or maybe even all of these things would not even be an issue to even discuss. And that's the future that we're working towards. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We need that. That sounds like the next panel right there. We don't need Batmans, So Christina, I know you have hella things to say, but tell us one, please.
All right, I'm gonna keep it real quick, because us town folks like to speak a lot, but feeling hella honored and blessed to be in this space with all these dope panelists and dope attendees. I really hope for us to continue building with Texas, the Bay. We got so much love for y'all out there, for reals. And really go more in depth with these conversations, specifically, like I said, with our young folks that are in this space as well, to really just go out there and do hella research, what this looks like and what it may look like in our communities in the future. But really, of course, I'm gonna keep it just like that so we can hear everybody's dope words. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Gabriella, what do you have to say?
I just feel really humbled to be here with everyone. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And it's not even work. Our hearts are in this, right? And just having the communities that we work with in mind. And I just want to remind folks that right now is a really critical time in Austin. We need your support, and we can't do it without you. So please, let's get that pledge signed, and let's bombard city council, the mayor, and the city manager with what they need to do, and that's to not give money back to the police.
Thank you for that reminder. We'll put that pledge back in the chat. Ashley, words.
Alrighty, guys. I mean, this first and foremost, yes, I'm so thankful to be able to be in a space where we can talk about things like this. And I just want to point out, as many have seen throughout each of our presentations, one thing that remains the same is that we needed the community, and the community really plays a role in these types of actions. So I just want to encourage everyone, like Gabrielle said, if anybody gets the chance, take a look at that pledge and just know that your voice is valid, and we can definitely use your help. What's happening down here in Austin, as y'all see, is happening in Oakland. These are not isolated events. This is happening all across the world, and the support is needed all across the world. Let's stand together in solidarity and get all of this taken care of. Thank you, guys.
Ashe. Kelly.
I'm really thankful to have been involved, and I'm really inspired by all the work that I see happening in Oakland, and I hope we get to continue to learn from each other and support each other. And to all my Austin folks, we have to keep pushing and continue to be hopeful and to move, to keep moving and building the world that we want to see, that we want to live in. And we don't have no choice. We have to. So yeah, thank y'all for having this, for doing this.
We do this because we have to. Paola, last but not least.
Whew. So yeah, thank y'all. I ditto to what everybody's saying. I really appreciate Policy Link for putting this together and helping us come together. I did want to give a shout out to the interpreters. It's so helpful to have the interpreters so we can really open the space more. The few thoughts I have is how can we at the same time recognize the monster, right? That the cops are just one arm of a bigger monster, just the heavy-handed thugs that keep order in place for the monster, which we can call it out as racial capitalism. How can we at the same time recognize that, and what you were talking about, James, move at the pace of our folks, right? And for me, that feels possible because we all know, and the folks we work with, in our bones, that policing doesn't make us feel safer, right? Like, I know it in my life as a youth, and now it's never made me feel safer. And I know that all of our community members know that. They don't need political education to know policing doesn't make us feel safer. So how do we harness that and focus on what we want, not just what we don't want? And so to me, that's where this opening is with these it's not about the task forces, but how we can both say, if we take from here, what are we creating and building? And that feels really exciting for me, of why this is worthwhile. Where will we put our money? How will we create safety? And we have plenty of money to do it if we move it in this way. And lastly, I want to know how many people are here as attendees. Anybody, Sarah? Anybody know?
Yeah, well, the numbers have been fluctuating, but there have been a lot of people, and this video will live on, so forever and ever amounts of attendees. But there have been hundreds.
Okay, so we've had hundreds so far, and just for us to take a moment to think about how do we harness just this collective people power in this moment of this evening. Right now in Austin, we're like, please sign the pledge, please do our postcards, because we have this particular urgent action, but also how do we use that to support each other's struggles and keep linking what's happening in Oakland to what's happening in Austin to what's happening in the other cities. That's what's exciting to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and deep bow of gratitude to all of you for sharing all of your brilliance. We have to keep these conversations going. We have to keep this work going. I want to give another shout out to Julia and Susana for providing language justice for us this evening. Cassandra, Jen, and Eugene for holding down all of our web needs. And for all of you for joining us this evening, thank you so much. You will have a survey in the chat. We ask that you please take these final moments to fill it out. If you don't have this moment now to fill it out, we're going to email it to you with all the resources, with this webinar recording. And thank you all so much. I'm just so grateful. My heart is so full. And, you know, I've been saying, oh, I'm so tired. I'm so tired after the year that we've been having. but this conversation has just given me the energy and the reminder that we do have the power and we do make a difference. And so I just feel like I got plugged in. I got my charge tonight. So thank you all so much. And we will be in touch. Have a good evening.